What happens when a chosen one is cut off from one of humanity's deepest instincts? Picture someone carrying a destiny larger than life, marked by insight and sensitivity, yet stripped of the very drive that, according to Freud, sits at the core of the unconscious: sexuality. For Freud, sexual energy was not a trivial pursuit of pleasure. It was the hidden current shaping dreams, neuroses, ambitions, even the rise and fall of entire societies. Now imagine that current dammed up. No outlet, no closeness, no release. The chosen one moves through the world with impulses sealed beneath the surface, the tension building silently in the dark. What becomes of a soul forced to repress its most primal urge? Instincts begin to warp. Desires bend into shadows, and inner conflict becomes an unrelenting companion. But Freud also taught that repression is never without consequence. It transforms raw instinct into something else. Sometimes it breeds anxiety and compulsion. Other times it fuels extraordinary creation and vision. Out of denial, a different form of power can emerge. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not simple theory. It is the unsettling truth of what happens when the chosen one is denied the fire that shapes both the unconscious and the destiny of humankind. 1. The invisible dam inside the mind. When sexual energy has nowhere to go, it doesn't simply vanish. It redirects. It mutates. It burrows deeper into places you didn't even know existed within yourself. Freud believed this trapped force creates pressure that warps everything it touches. For someone marked as different, set apart by sensitivity and awareness, this creates what he called a strangled feeling, emotion with no escape, impulse with no release, a scream that never leaves your throat. Your mind becomes two places at once. On the surface, you're moving through daily life. Working, thinking, trying to stay focused on what needs doing. But underneath, something churns constantly. That raw life force Freud saw as the engine of human existence keeps grinding against invisible walls. This isn't about simple frustration or passing attraction. This is about the deepest biological and psychological drive being blocked day after day, year after year, until the blockage itself becomes part of who you are. Strange things start happening that you can't quite explain. Dreams become vivid in ways that leave you shaken when you wake up. Images appear that you don't understand, but that feel loaded with meaning you can't decode. Freud would recognize these immediately as your unconscious trying desperately to discharge what's forbidden through the only door still open. But dreams only provide shadow satisfaction. They leave the deeper hunger completely untouched, sometimes making it worse because you've tasted something that dissolves the moment you open your eyes. During waking hours, your mind starts building defenses you don't even realize are defenses. You might become rigidly moral about physical matters, judging others for behaviors you secretly long for. Or you disconnect entirely, convincing yourself you're above such base needs, that your calling is higher than the body's demands. On the surface, this looks like spiritual evolution or advanced consciousness. In reality, it's your psyche protecting you from desires too threatening to face directly. Your body keeps score in ways that confuse doctors. Chronic tension settles into your shoulders and jaw. Mysterious pains appear without medical explanation. Your stomach rebels for no clear reason. Sleep becomes difficult even when you're exhausted. Freud observed that when sexual energy cannot flow through its natural channel, it often converts into physical symptoms. Your body literally holds what you cannot express, and that holding creates genuine suffering that no pill seems to touch. What makes this particularly brutal is the isolation it creates. While others navigate relationships and intimacy as normal parts of existence, you watch from behind a barrier nobody else can see. There's a sense of being fundamentally different, marked by something that includes this particular form of exile. Your mind starts asking dangerous questions in the middle of the night. Why does this keep happening? What makes you different from everyone else? Did you do something to deserve this separation from basic human warmth? Your sense of self takes hits that leave invisible bruises. That part of you that mediates between what you want and what reality offers becomes fragile from repeated denial. Each rejection, each night alone, each moment of watching others experience what remains forever out of reach chips away at how you see yourself. You might develop what looks like humility or spiritual detachment, but underneath often lies something held together by elaborate defenses you've spent years constructing without realizing it. Your intellectual life often intensifies as everything else closes down. You pour energy into ideas, spiritual practices, creative work, anything to channel what has nowhere else to go. Freud called this redirection one of civilization's great engines. Art, philosophy, scientific discovery, so much human achievement springs from this exact process. But there's a cost nobody talks about. The redirected life, however productive, carries an undercurrent of sadness, a sense that something essential has been sacrificed for something else, and you're never quite sure the trade was worth it. Perhaps most insidious is how your mind begins making up stories about why this is actually better. You create elaborate reasons why being alone is superior, why desire is beneath you, why you're meant for something beyond such earthly concerns. Freud would see through this immediately. That internalized voice of prohibition has become tyrannical, a prison guard ensuring the sexual self remains locked away while pretending it's doing you a favor. Time becomes an enemy in a way others don't understand. Years pass, and what started as circumstance hardens into character. The pathways for intimacy grow dusty from disuse. Your capacity for vulnerability shrinks like an unused muscle. What began as something imposed from outside becomes something you impose on yourself, unconsciously arranging your life to ensure continued isolation. Freud understood this tragic pattern. We often become partners in our own deprivation, recreating early wounds in an unconscious attempt to master them, never realizing we're just making them permanent. The really disturbing part is how normal this abnormal state starts to feel. You forget what it was like to reach for someone and have them reach back. You forget the simple animal comfort of another body near yours. The absence becomes your baseline, and anything else would feel strange, threatening, wrong. Your prison becomes your home, and the thought of leaving it terrifies you more than staying ever could. 2. When desire turns against itself. Building on this internal pressure, something even darker begins to happen. That desire with nowhere to go doesn't just sit quietly. It turns inward and becomes its own torturer. Freud mapped this transformation carefully, showing how denied instinct loops back on itself in increasingly destructive patterns. For someone already set apart, already different, this creates a peculiar hell where the very thing that should connect you to life becomes a source of internal persecution. This is where the story gets genuinely disturbing. When sexual energy has no outlet, Freud observed it often changes into anxiety, not the occasional nervousness everyone feels, but a free-floating dread that attaches to everything and nothing. You might develop panic attacks with no clear trigger, obsessive thoughts that circle endlessly like vultures, or a constant sense that something terrible is always about to happen. Your unconscious mind, unable to process the frustrated desire directly, converts it into fear that colors everything you touch. But anxiety is just what shows on the surface. Deeper down, something more sinister brews. Freud identified a mechanism where aggressive impulses that should go outward get redirected inward instead. Unable to express frustration at your circumstance, you begin unconsciously attacking yourself. Self-sabotage becomes a pattern you can't break. Opportunities for connection mysteriously evaporate right when they seem possible. Your mind becomes expert at finding reasons why intimacy is impossible, dangerous, or simply not meant for you, and you believe these reasons completely. The voice inside your head grows poisonous in ways you might not even notice at first. Where once there was simple longing, now there's shame. Where there was desire, now there's self-disgust. You begin viewing your own sexuality as something fundamentally wrong, broken, or cursed. That internalized voice of prohibition has become sadistic, demanding purity and renunciation while punishing you for the very desires it's supposed to be controlling. Your dreams during this phase take on nightmare qualities that stay with you for days. Freud taught that dreams are the royal road to understanding the unconscious, and for someone denied this way, that road leads through increasingly disturbing territory. Sexual content appears, but always twisted. Violence mixed with intimacy, humiliation woven through attraction, scenarios that should feel good but fill you with horror instead. Even in sleep, the internal censor remains vigilant, distorting every image of satisfaction into something grotesque. Waking life mirrors this distortion in ways that become harder to hide. You find yourself drawn to relationships designed to fail, people who are unavailable, situations that guarantee frustration, dynamics that recreate the original deprivation in perfect detail. Freud called this the repetition compulsion, and it's one of his most tragic insights. We unconsciously recreate our wounds not to heal them, but because familiar pain feels safer than the unknown territory of actual fulfillment. Better the devil you know, even if that devil is destroying you slowly. Your relationship with your own body becomes almost phobic. Normal physical sensations get interpreted as threats. Arousal itself triggers anxiety rather than pleasure. You develop an almost fearful relationship with your own flesh, seeing it as a source of uncontrollable urges that must be constantly monitored and suppressed. Touch becomes dangerous. Your very skin becomes a boundary that triggers internal alarms if anyone crosses it, even in innocent ways. The more rigidly you suppress everything, the more chaotically it returns. Freud observed that forbidden material always forces its way back into consciousness through symptoms. For you, this might show up as intrusive thoughts at inappropriate moments, compulsive behaviors that disguise what they're really about, or sudden eruptions of emotion that seem to have no cause. The tighter you grip control, the more violently things slip through your fingers. Social situations become minefields you navigate with exhausting vigilance. You develop radar for anything potentially related to what you're denying. Innocent comments trigger complex reactions you have to quickly suppress. The sight of couples doing nothing more than holding hands triggers emotions you can't name. Envy, rage, despair, all quickly buried beneath a mask of indifference. So much energy goes into this constant self-monitoring that there's barely any left for actually connecting with anyone. Perhaps most tragic is what Freud termed moral masochism, where suffering itself becomes the only form of satisfaction still permitted. You begin unconsciously seeking situations that guarantee continued pain because at least pain feels like something. At least it's proof you're alive in a world that's become increasingly numb. The deprivation becomes an identity, a perverse source of specialness that makes you different from everyone else. You're suffering, yes, but at least you're suffering in ways others couldn't handle, and there's a strange pride in that. Your connections with others become increasingly abstract and distant. You can discuss intimacy in theoretical terms, offer advice about relationships, even create art about desire. But direct participation remains impossibly far away. It's like being fluent in a language you've never actually spoken aloud, knowing all the words, but none of the music. The disconnect between intellectual understanding and lived experience grows into a chasm that separates you from nearly everyone in ways they can sense but not quite identify. Fantasy becomes both refuge and prison. What begins as harmless imagination to ease the loneliness curdles into something compulsive and consuming. Hours disappear into internal worlds that provide decreasing satisfaction with each visit. These fantasies are detailed, elaborate, emotionally rich, in some ways more real than the external world. But Freud understood that fantasy becomes pathological when it completely replaces reality. For you, fantasy becomes a gilded cage, safer than real vulnerability, but ultimately suffocating in ways you only recognize when it's almost too late to find the door. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. The secret power hidden in denial. Yet here's where this dark story takes an unexpected turn. As these internal battles rage and desire continues turning against itself, something else emerges from the wreckage. Freud didn't see repression as purely destructive. Within the brutal machinery of denial, he identified a strange transformation, base instinct converted into higher achievement. For someone denied this way, this becomes both consolation and curse, a power bought at tremendous cost but undeniably real. What actually happens is that raw energy, blocked from its natural outlet, seeks alternative channels with the same intensity it once sought physical union. You find yourself driven toward pursuits with focus that borders on obsession. Art, philosophy, spiritual practice, intellectual inquiry, whatever channel the redirected energy finds becomes all-consuming. This isn't casual interest. This is creation born from necessity, work infused with the urgency of unfulfilled longing. Late nights working become a kind of substitute for what you're missing. The creative process fills some of the void left by human touch. There's genuine ecstasy here, if bittersweet. The pleasure of making something where intimacy should have been. You pour into your craft the passion that has no other home, and what emerges often carries unusual power because of this origin. Freud pointed to civilization's greatest works as evidence of this process. How much art exists because the creator couldn't have the lover they wanted? How much philosophy springs from frustration seeking resolution through ideas? The foundations of culture itself, he argued, rest on this bargain. Instinct surrendered in exchange for achievement, desire transformed into lasting works that outlive the body's brief urgency. For you, this creates a double-edged existence. Your output often surpasses others who dissipate energy through relationships and physical satisfaction. The focused intensity born from deprivation produces work of unusual depth and power. People sense something different in what you create, a hunger, an urgency, a quality that distinguishes it from more casual efforts. Your work carries the mark of necessity, and that mark makes it compelling in ways you never intended. But there's darkness woven through this consolation. The work becomes a substitute that can never fully satisfy. Each completed project should bring fulfillment, but instead leaves the underlying hunger untouched. You're like someone trying to quench thirst by painting pictures of water. The act itself is meaningful, even beautiful, but the fundamental need remains unmet. This creates restlessness that never leaves, a compulsion to keep creating because stopping means facing the void directly. Awareness of this mechanism becomes yet another burden. You know your output springs from deprivation. You understand your creative drive is fueled by lack. This knowledge taints the accomplishment, making it feel less like genuine achievement and more like elaborate compensation for what you can't have. The work you're proudest of carries the shadow of its origin, and you can never quite decide if that makes it more meaningful or less. The relationship with your work takes on qualities that would be intimate if directed toward a person. You develop intense attachment to projects, possessive and jealous of time spent away from them. The work becomes lover, companion, the primary relationship in a life where human connection remains distant. The act of creation becomes charged with meaning it might not carry for others. Completion brings a kind of release. Finished works feel like offspring of a sort. Others often sense something unusual about your devotion. There's an intensity that makes people uncomfortable, a quality of desperation underneath the dedication they can feel but not quite name. Social gatherings become opportunities for you to discuss your work obsessively while others exchange glances. Conversations that should be casual become passionate dissertations on whatever currently consumes you. You don't realize how the denied energy bleeds through every interaction, how people can sense you're pouring into ideas what should flow toward them. Success in these pursuits brings complications nobody warns you about. External validation provides temporary satisfaction, but ultimately highlights what's missing. Awards, recognition, achievement. These feed one part of you while leaving the deeper hunger completely untouched. You might reach the pinnacle of your field and still feel fundamentally empty, successful on paper but profoundly lonely in reality. The gap between external accomplishment and internal desolation becomes almost unbearable. Your body doesn't forget, even as your mind constructs elaborate channels for the energy. Physical symptoms persist or intensify despite creative success. You achieve recognition while privately battling chronic tension, mysterious illness, ailments that baffle medical professionals. The body keeps score in its own language, insisting that substitution isn't the same as satisfaction, no matter how beautiful the substitution becomes. There's also risk in this arrangement. Years of carefully redirected energy might suddenly rebel, demanding its original object with a force that terrifies you. The person who has built an entire identity around their work may find themselves in crisis when desire refuses to be channeled any longer. These moments of breakdown can be catastrophic, everything you've built suddenly revealed as elaborate avoidance of what you actually need. Yet despite these risks, something genuine emerges from the process. Works created this way carry a particular signature. Audiences might not understand the origin, but they feel something in what you've made that touches them differently than more conventional creations. Your pain becomes their insight. Your deprivation becomes their doorway to understanding something about being human they couldn't access otherwise. This is the strange gift hidden in the curse, your suffering transmuted into something that serves others, even as it continues costing you everything. 4. The wound that shapes everything. As this power develops from denial, a deeper question emerges about where all this truly began. These patterns don't appear from nowhere. Freud taught that our earliest experiences with desire and denial create blueprints that echo through entire lives. Understanding this origin reveals why the current deprivation feels so catastrophic, so much more than simple biological frustration. The wound runs deeper than you've imagined. In the beginning, the infant wants immediately and completely. The breast, the mother's presence, satisfaction of every need without delay. But reality intervenes. The breast isn't always available. The mother has other demands on her attention. The infant experiences what feels like abandonment, a terrifying gap between desire and fulfillment. This becomes the first template for understanding how the world works. Freud saw this primal frustration as the foundation for all later experiences of want. When you experience denial now, these ancient wounds reopen with full force. The adult experience of being denied intimacy resonates with that infant terror of abandonment. The feeling isn't just about the present situation, it's the reactivation of humanity's most basic fear. You're fundamentally unlovable, you're cast out, you're doomed to perpetual want. The intensity of your reaction makes sense. Only when you understand it's not just now that's hurting you, but then, when you were small and helpless, and the world first said no. Early experiences leave marks that persist. If caregivers were inconsistent, withholding, or treated your needs as burdensome, that becomes your internal working model for all later relationships. You expect to be denied, because denial was the original response to your existence. You unconsciously choose people who are unavailable or sabotage those who are available because availability itself triggers alarm. It doesn't match what you learned to expect, so it must be dangerous, a trap, something that will hurt worse than the familiar loneliness. The voice that criticizes you now often speaks in tones you first heard in childhood. Freud called this the superego, but from inside it feels like God, fate, or simply the way things are pronouncing judgment. You may not remember specific incidents of being shamed, but the legacy remains. A bone-deep sense that your desires are wrong, disgusting, marks of unworthiness that justify continued exile from warmth and connection. Sexual development in childhood also leaves its fingerprints. If normal curiosity about bodies and pleasure met harsh punishment, those associations persist. You carry deep equations formed before language. Pleasure equals punishment, desire equals danger, sexuality equals separation from love. These unconscious beliefs sabotage adult possibilities before they can even begin, ensuring the continuation of childhood patterns into a life that should be free of them, but somehow never is. Freud believed we can get psychologically stuck at early stages if crucial needs weren't met. You might be frozen at a time before full integration of adult sexuality was possible because something in the sequence got disrupted. You can intellectually understand everything, even desire it consciously, but something deeper remains unable to move forward. Like trying to run with a leg that never healed properly, you make the motions but can't quite achieve the natural flow others seem to have without thinking. Dreams during this period often return to childhood settings without you understanding why. The parental home appears night after night. Early schools, formative locations you haven't consciously thought about in years. Your psyche is trying to process unresolved material that keeps repeating in present circumstances. The child who couldn't have needs met becomes the adult who can't access intimacy. Same wound, different costume, same pain across decades. Freud also observed that deep wounds create false memories, seemingly clear recollections of incidents that seem random or insignificant, while more crucial experiences remain buried. You might have crystal clear memory of something that doesn't seem to matter, while the truly formative moments hide in shadow. Working through these distortions can reveal hidden logic to your current situation. How present circumstances aren't accidental, but the predictable outcome of unresolved past. Your relationship with your body tells its own story. How was the child's body treated? Was it a source of healthy pleasure and pride, or a site of shame requiring constant control? If early caregivers communicated that the body was disgusting, dangerous, or needed rigid policing, that message persists. You carry a body you've never fully inhabited, never claimed as your own, always experienced as something separate that causes problems rather than home for the self. There's often a crystallizing moment when the future pattern locked into place, maybe harsh rejection of normal affection, shaming response to innocent curiosity, or simply the slow realization that your needs didn't matter to the adults responsible for meeting them. You might not consciously remember this moment, but it lives in the body's memory, shaping every subsequent approach or avoidance of intimacy with the force of commandment carved in stone. Understanding this doesn't automatically change anything. The past can't be undone. Early patterns, especially those formed before language, resist conscious modification. But seeing the shape of the wound clearly removes one layer of suffering. The layer that comes from not understanding why this keeps happening. You're not cursed by random fate. You're not being specially punished. You're living out the logic of unresolved childhood material, and while that's tragic, it's at least comprehensible. There's strange comfort in understanding, even when understanding can't heal what it illuminates. 5. The transformation nobody sees. Living with this wound year after year, understanding its origins but unable to fully resolve it, creates changes nobody sees from outside. While the world observes only your surface, achievements, apparent composure, intellectual or spiritual pursuits, a profound metamorphosis occurs beneath. Your entire personality reorganizes around the obstacle. This transformation is both your hidden strength and your secret devastation. The first major shift happens in how you perceive reality. You begin seeing symbols everywhere. Freud believed all thinking is ultimately rooted in the energy you're denying, and when that denial is complete, the mind becomes hyper-aware of substitutes and representations. A tower stops being just architecture. A cave entrance becomes more than geology. Every myth, story, or artistic image reveals hidden content others miss entirely. This symbolic vision grants unusual insight, but also becomes a kind of prison where nothing can be taken at face value because everything refers back to forbidden territory. Your emotional life transforms dramatically. Where others experience discrete feelings, sadness, joy, anger, you feel everything simultaneously in complex mixtures that defy simple naming. Freud would recognize this as repression breaking down clear boundaries between feeling states. With the primary drive blocked, all other emotions become tinged with that frustrated energy. Joy contains sorrow. Anger carries longing. Every feeling becomes compound, nuanced, to the point of being unreadable to others, and sometimes to yourself. Social interaction undergoes profound change. You develop ability to see through others' defenses and rationalizations with unsettling accuracy. Because you've spent so long analyzing your own unconscious drives, you become eerily good at reading hidden motivations. This makes you an exceptional guide for others. But it also isolates you further. Knowing everyone's hidden agenda makes genuine connection even more difficult. You see the undercurrents in every interaction while remaining unable to participate at that level yourself. Your relationship with time changes in ways that separate you from how others experience life. Most people live primarily in the present, their current moment anchored by ongoing relationships and physical experiences. You, denied those anchors, often live between past and future. The past, because you're constantly analyzing how you arrived here. The future, because you project scenarios where things might be different. The present moment becomes almost impossible to fully inhabit because it's the site of deprivation. Better to dwell in memory or fantasy than face what's missing right now. Your creative output doesn't just increase, it fundamentally transforms in quality and character. Early work might have been conventional, showing technical skill but limited vision. After years of this reorganization, what you create takes on qualities others struggle to categorize. It's darker, deeper, more penetrating. It makes audiences uncomfortable while compelling their attention in ways they can't quite explain. Raw Drive has been transformed into works that carry the power of the original impulse, just redirected into forms that can exist in the world. Your physical body transforms in subtle ways others rarely consciously notice. Chronic tension becomes baseline, creating characteristic postures and movement patterns. Your jaw clenches without you realizing. Shoulders rise toward ears and stay there. The way you walk becomes guarded, protective. Touch becomes foreign. You might go months or years without meaningful physical contact, and the body adapts by becoming almost defensive, flinching at unexpected contact, unable to relax into proximity with another person. The inner world becomes increasingly elaborate, and consuming. Where others might daydream occasionally, you construct entire parallel realities. These internal worlds are detailed, consistent, emotionally rich, in some ways more real than the external world that offers so little satisfaction. Freud would be fascinated by these elaborate constructions, seeing them as evidence of psychic creativity, but also concerned about the withdrawal from reality they represent. Your inner life becomes so compelling that outer life pales in comparison. Moral categories blur in unexpected ways. Having experienced profound deprivation, you often develop unusual compassion for others who transgress conventional boundaries. You understand compulsion, desperate acts, the human animal driven by forces it doesn't control. This can make you a non-judgmental guide for others' darkness, but it can also leave you vulnerable, unable to maintain healthy boundaries because you identify too strongly with everyone's suffering, seeing your own reflected in theirs. Spirituality or philosophy intensifies dramatically beyond intellectual interest. When physical existence offers so little satisfaction, questions about meaning become urgently real. Purpose, the nature of reality, what lies beyond the visible, these aren't academic exercises, but survival strategies. You become genuinely mystical or deeply philosophical from existential necessity. Freud was skeptical of such pursuits, but even he understood their psychological power, the denied energy seeking cosmic union instead of human intimacy. Your dreams become increasingly bizarre and significant. You might start keeping detailed journals, finding in the night world a richness absent from waking hours. The dreams themselves grow more elaborate, sometimes reaching mythological proportions with recurring symbols and narratives. For you, wishes are so powerful and so blocked that only dreams can express them, creating nightly dramas of impossible grandeur that feel more important than anything happening during the day. Even your voice changes, often literally. The way you speak might have shifted over years, becoming more modulated, more controlled, less spontaneous. Laughter becomes rare, forced when it occurs. The voice of someone whose primary expression is through channels other than direct connection. Even the words you choose become more careful, constructed, less reflexive and more considered. Others might describe you as articulate, but somehow distant, clear but not quite present. Memory itself transforms in service of the new structure. Certain memories, those involving physical intimacy, even innocent forms like childhood affection, might fade unusually quickly or become distorted. Other memories, especially those involving achievement or insight, become crystal clear. The mind organizes what's safe to remember, pushing painful absences into shadow while preserving evidence of compensatory transformations. You remember what supports the person you've become while forgetting what reminds you of what you've lost. 6. The ultimate question: destiny or choice? This brings us to the most unsettling question at the heart of everything. Is this deprivation something imposed from outside, or have you unconsciously chosen it? Freud's most radical insight was that we participate in our own suffering more than we realize. That much of what appears as fate is actually unconscious repetition. For someone living this way, this possibility is both terrifying and potentially liberating. Consider the pattern with ruthless honesty. You claim you desperately want connection, yet opportunities consistently evaporate. You're attracted to people who are unavailable. Available people somehow don't attract you. Timing is always wrong. Circumstances never align. If you charted this statistically, the odds of such consistent failure would be astronomical, unless something else operates beneath conscious awareness, something arranging outcomes you consciously claim not to want. Freud would ask, what does this situation do for you? Deprivation, however painful, might be protecting you from something even more terrifying. Perhaps true intimacy threatens your carefully constructed identity. Perhaps vulnerability feels like annihilation. Perhaps you've decided that desire is so dangerous it must be eliminated, and perpetual denial is how you've accomplished that without having to consciously choose it. The unconscious is vastly more powerful than conscious intention. You might consciously want connection while unconsciously ensuring it remains impossible. You sabotage promising relationships through behaviors you don't notice. You interpret neutral interactions as rejection. You communicate unavailability through countless subtle signals others instinctively pick up on, all while believing you're trying your hardest, victim of circumstances beyond your control. There's also what you gain from this situation: moral superiority over those enslaved to physical desires. Freedom from the complications relationships demand, time and energy for pursuits that might be impossible with a partner. An identity as the misunderstood outsider, which feels more meaningful than ordinary struggles. These gains are real, even if acknowledging them feels like betrayal. But there's another possibility Freud recognized. Perhaps some people genuinely are different. Perhaps you carry a temperament that makes ordinary intimacy genuinely unsuited to you. Some nervous systems are too sensitive, some inner worlds too complex for standard human connection to satisfy. This isn't rationalization. It's acknowledgement that human variation is real and some people are built differently. Maybe the deprivation isn't punishment or neurosis, but an actual calling. Freud was ambivalent about this idea, yet he recognized that some of humanity's greatest contributors lived apart, creating from their isolation things impossible from conventional lives. The deprivation might be the price of the particular gift you bring. The brutal truth might be that both things are simultaneously true. You are both unconsciously choosing your isolation and genuinely different in ways that make ordinary connection difficult. You are both repeating trauma patterns and responding to a genuine calling that demands sacrifice. Psychology and destiny interweave so thoroughly they can't be separated. What then is the way forward? First, seeing the pattern clearly. Recognizing how unconscious forces might be arranging the very circumstances consciousness fights against. Bringing shadow material into light doesn't necessarily change it, but it removes being blindly driven. You gain choice by acknowledging what's been operating without your knowledge, but there's also wisdom in accepting that some structures don't fundamentally change. The work isn't necessarily to eliminate the wound, but to understand it, to develop a different relationship with it. You might always live at some remove from ordinary intimacy. The question becomes whether you can make peace with that reality while still living fully within its constraints. There's the possibility of conscious channeling, deliberately choosing to redirect this energy into creative or spiritual pursuits while understanding that's what you're doing. This transforms the experience from helpless victimhood to active choice. The deprivation remains, but the relationship to it changes from passive suffering to deliberate sacrifice made in service of something that matters more than conventional fulfillment. The final question is whether you can forgive yourself and reality for this circumstance. Much suffering comes from refusing to accept what is. Constantly fighting against your situation, insisting it should be different, adds a second layer of suffering to the original deprivation. Acceptance isn't giving up, it's releasing the resistance that makes the circumstance even more painful than it inherently is. Perhaps some souls enter existence carrying unusual burdens for reasons that remain fundamentally mysterious. Your deprivation might be one thread in a larger pattern of being marked, set apart, given both terrible costs and strange gifts. Something in you might have always known this was your path, even as another part has fought against it every step. The ultimate reality is this: you must find meaning in the deprivation itself, discover what it teaches, transform the wound into source. Not because that's fair, but because that's the only way through. The denied energy can fuel a life of significance impossible through conventional channels. That's the terrible, extraordinary destiny, suffering transformed into power, deprivation alchemized into vision, the wound itself becoming the gift you bring to a world that will never fully understand the price you paid for it.